Two sisters take a DNA test for fun, but when the results link them to a decades-old crime, their family's darkest secrets come crashing to the surface. What they uncover will change their lives forever. In the quiet hum of the evening, the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the old, weathered porch of their family home. Zara and Selena sat side by side on the steps, their shoulders brushing as they exchanged glances. Rachel had asked them to clean the attic, a task that had loomed over them for weeks since their grandmother Evelyn's passing. It wasn't just the boxes of memories and forgotten items they had to sift through, but the weight of what had been left unsaid. "Look at this." Selena's voice broke through the silence, soft but full of curiosity. She held up a small box, its corners worn, its surface dusted with age. The words "Ancestry Journey" were printed on the side, the lettering faded but still visible. Zara tilted her head, eyeing it with interest. "Never knew Evelyn was into stuff like this," Zara remarked, her voice laced with a hint of skepticism. Selena opened the box slowly, pulling out 2 sealed vials and a set of instructions. Her brow furrowed as she read through the sheet, her fingers brushing the paper with a hint of disbelief. Zara leaned over her shoulder, her curiosity piqued, but her tone remained light, joking. "Well, we may as well finish what she started, right? Who knows, maybe we're royalty." Selena chuckled despite herself, but there was a nervous energy in the air that neither of them could shake. Evelyn had always been full of mystery, a woman who lived her life in careful silence. She had always kept things close to her chest, and the idea of her secretly wanting to learn more about her ancestry seemed, in a way, to contradict the very nature of the woman they had known. "It's just a DNA test, Selena," Zara continued, her tone shifting slightly to something more serious. "Let's see what it says. Could be fun." In the next few minutes, the test was completed, the vials were sealed, the prepaid envelopes stuffed with samples. They dropped them into the mailbox outside, half joking about the small adventure they were about to embark on. Neither could have anticipated how those simple swabs would turn their world upside down. 2 weeks passed before the email came, and when it did, Zara was the first to check. Her heart raced with anticipation as she clicked open the results, the words, "Significant findings," standing out on the screen like a flashing red light. "What does this mean?" Zara's voice caught in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled down, the hairs on the back of her neck rising with each word she read. "What's this about genetic matching?" she murmured, the confusion and unease creeping into her voice. Selena leaned in closer, the growing tension palpable between them. "Let's ask Rachel," she said, though she too felt the odd sense of unease that had settled over them. The curiosity was quickly turning into something darker, and that was when the first real hint of danger began to unfold. An ordinary DNA test that was meant to explore their roots, turning into something far more sinister than either could have imagined. The air in the kitchen was thick with tension when Rachel walked in, her expression unreadable as she approached the table where Zara and Selena sat, staring at the screen of the computer. The glow from the monitor seemed too bright now, the words on it heavy with significance. "What's this?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of worry that neither of the girls had expected. "Rachel, we're not sure," Zara replied, her voice shaky despite her efforts to remain calm. She glanced up at her mother's face, searching for any hint of recognition, anything that could explain the strange words on the screen. The results from the DNA test were anything but ordinary. There was a link, something too significant to ignore, something tied to an unresolved crime that had remained cold for years. Zara's heart sank, her thoughts racing as she tried to make sense of it all. "There's a note about a match, and not just any match, Rachel. It's linked to a case." Rachel's face paled, and she didn't need to say a word to communicate the surge of panic that flickered in her eyes. The silence between them seemed to stretch, thick and suffocating, before she spoke again. "Let me see." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the mouse, clicking to expand the document, her gaze scanning the information rapidly, a frown deepening with every word. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, all faded into the background as the tension in the room built. "I need you to stay calm," Rachel said, her voice breaking the stillness with an almost unnatural calmness. But Zara could see the slight tremor in her hands as she set the results down on the counter. But the look on Selina's face, pale, wide-eyed, betrayed the uncertainty they all felt. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is this? What's going on?" Zara felt her chest tighten. Something was off. Rachel had always been their anchor, the one who shielded them from the storm of the world. But this was different. "We need to go to Dr. Caldwell's office," Rachel said after a long pause, her voice now low and resolute. "I'll call and make an appointment. We need answers." There was no question in her tone, only a quiet, determined urgency. Zara knew better than to question her mother in moments like these. She had a way of handling situations, even the most otherworldly, with a strength that was almost otherworldly. But as they left the house, the journey to Dr. Caldwell's office felt like an eternity. Zara stared out the window, her mind racing through every possible scenario, trying to find a logical explanation. Selina sat beside her, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve, clearly struggling to maintain composure. The drive was silent except for the soft hum of the engine, the occasional rumble of tires against the road. When they arrived, the clinic was sterile, the waiting room quiet, but the unease still hung over them like a cloud. As they were led into Dr. Caldwell's office, a feeling of dread settled in the pit of Zara's stomach. The doctor greeted them, but his warm demeanor shifted the moment he opened their results. Zara could feel the tension build, the weight of the situation pressing on her chest as Dr. Caldwell's face changed from calm to something else, something unreadable. "I need to step out for a moment," he said suddenly, his voice tight, and just like that, the quiet unease exploded into panic. The door clicked shut behind him, and in his absence, all Zara and Selina could do was stare at each other, unsure of what would happen next. Then the door opened again, but this time it wasn't just Dr. Caldwell who walked in. 2 uniformed police officers followed him, their expressions grim, their presence a stark contrast to the sterile calm of the clinic. "We need to speak with you," one of the officers said, his voice low but commanding. Zara's heart raced as Rachel shot to her feet, her voice rising in confusion and fear. "What's going on?" she demanded. "What is this? My daughters are just kids." The officer's eyes softened slightly, but his words remained firm. "There's been a finding in your daughter's DNA that requires further investigation. We can't discuss the details here, but it's a matter of legal importance." The words hit Zara like a punch to the gut. Legal? Investigation? What had they uncovered? Her mind spun with questions that were quickly becoming too overwhelming to process. The calm certainty she had always associated with her mother was gone, replaced by something darker and far more ominous. As they were escorted out of the clinic, the bright daylight greeted them like a shock, the air thick with the clicks of cameras and the shouted questions of reporters. Zara glanced at her mother, her expression now taut with fear, and for the first time, Zara wondered if the answers they were seeking would lead them down a road from which there was no return. Their lives, once simple and predictable, were no longer in their control. The truth, whatever it was about to unravel, and it was much bigger than they had ever imagined. The drive to the police station felt like it stretched on for an eternity. Zara sat in the back seat, staring out of the window, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and dread. Selina sat next to her, clutching her mother's hand, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The usual quiet comfort of their small family had evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of something dark and unknown. Every passing building outside the car seemed to blur together, but Zara's mind was crystal clear, focused only on one question. What did this mean for them? The letters, the investigation, the officers. It was all too much. The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. But Rachel, sitting in the front seat, remained unnervingly quiet, her posture stiff, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if she were bracing herself for whatever lay ahead. When they finally arrived at the station, Zara's heart raced in her chest. The officers escorted them through sterile hallways, the cold fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Their footsteps echoed loudly, each step marking another moment of separation between them and the lives they knew. The sharp scent of disinfectant hung in the air, further cementing the reality of the situation. They were no longer in control. Something had been uncovered, and now there was no going back. Inside the interrogation room, they sat at a plain table, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across their faces. The officer who had led them inside gave a curt nod and left, and soon after, a man entered. Detective Johnson, as he introduced himself, took a seat across from them. His calm demeanor didn't match the intensity of the situation, and Zara couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that gnawed at her gut. "We need to talk about what's been found," Detective Johnson began, his voice steady but filled with authority. His eyes briefly met Rachel's before he glanced at the twins. Zara could see the heaviness in his gaze. He wasn't here to offer comfort. He was here to get answers. "This DNA match, it's tied to an old case," he continued. "An abduction case, to be exact. And the evidence found at the scene matches both of you." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to ask what it meant, what had been found, but the words wouldn't come. Abduction? The thought hung in the air like a thick fog, impossible to escape. The detective's next words sent a chill down her spine. "Your grandmother Evelyn's name has come up in connection with the case." The words felt like a physical blow, her mind struggling to piece together what he was saying. Zara looked at Rachel, whose face had drained of color. She looked lost, as if she were seeing something she never thought she would have to face. "I need to know," the detective said, breaking through the silence. "If you have any reason to believe that your grandmother was involved in this case or knew something about it." Rachel's hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table, her voice trembling as she said, No, I don't. This doesn't make sense. My mother, she was always protective. She would never—" But her voice faltered, and Zara saw the cracks begin to form. The pieces weren't fitting together. They were being asked to untangle something that didn't belong to them, something far beyond the scope of their understanding. "I know this is hard," Johnson said, leaning forward slightly, "but the truth is, the connection between you and this case is real, and it's not something we can ignore." Selina sat quietly, her face pale, her mind racing with questions she couldn't voice. But Zara knew she wasn't alone in her confusion. What had their grandmother been hiding? What did this mean for their family? And why had their lives suddenly taken a turn into darkness? Detective Johnson handed them a folder with documents, pictures, statements, and evidence that were all too much to process at once. Zara's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages, stopping at one picture that sent a wave of nausea crashing over her. A child's face, a small infant in a blurry photograph from years ago. "We need to know if you recognize this child," Johnson said. Zara felt her heart stop. The child in the picture wasn't her, wasn't Selina, but the story was quickly becoming much larger than anything they could have prepared for. There was something bigger here, something buried deep, hidden in the corners of their family's past. "Your grandmother's journal entries," Johnson added, his voice quiet but urgent. "We need those. If you found anything that could explain her involvement in this, please bring it to us." And as the twins and Rachel left the station, the weight of their discovery loomed even larger. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. The answers they sought were tied to their family's past, and those secrets, buried for so long, were finally coming to light. What came next was beyond their control, but the truth was relentless, and it was going to change everything. As the days passed, the weight of the investigation settled like an anchor in the pit of Zara's stomach. The normal hum of daily life was gone, replaced with a growing sense of unease. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but each revelation only deepened the questions. The twins found themselves in an unfamiliar place, their identities shaken by the DNA test, their grandmother Evelyn's journals, and the troubling connection to a decades-old abduction case. The more they uncovered, the less they understood. Rachel, once a source of comfort, was now a shadow of her former self. Her strength had always been a rock, a steady presence in their lives, but now her eyes were haunted with the weight of unknown truths. The twins felt a growing distance between them and the woman who had always been their protector. She had always shielded them from the world's darkness, but now it seemed like the very thing she had tried to protect them from was closing in. The journals became their only clue. Each night, After Rachel went to bed, Zara and Selena would sit in the dim light of their living room, poring over the fragile pages. The entries were cryptic, full of hints and fragments, as though their grandmother had known something was coming, but couldn't bring herself to reveal it. She had made a promise to protect them, but in doing so, she had buried the truth so deeply that now it felt like they were digging through layers of her life to find the heart of the secret. Zara's mind couldn't stop racing. She had spent years thinking of her grandmother as an enigma, a strong, loving figure who had lived through her own set of hardships. But now, each word in those journals painted into a different picture. Her grandmother, the woman who had seemed to live a quiet life of simplicity and routine, had been entangled in something far more sinister. The mention of the mysterious he in her journals, the man who had come to her doorstep begging her to take the twins, was a constant in the entries, but the details remained just out of reach. One night, as Zara sat alone with the journals, she came across something new, something she had missed earlier. It was a single line, written almost as an afterthought, tucked between two longer entries. The handwriting was different, more rushed, as though the words had been hastily written in a moment of fear. "I never told them everything. I couldn't. But I hope one day they'll understand." Zara's breath caught in her throat. Her grandmother had known more than she had let on, and now it was up to them to unravel the mystery. The words gnawed at her. What had she known? What had she hidden? And more importantly, why? The weight of the question lingered in the air like a storm cloud. The twins didn't just need answers, they needed closure. They couldn't move forward with their lives, with their identities, until the truth was out. And that truth, they feared, would shake the very foundation of everything they had known about their family. Selena was less patient than Zara. She was desperate for answers, ready to confront the past head-on, no matter how painful it might be. Zara, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel the pull of hesitation. They were reaching into a darkness that had been concealed for decades. Would they be able to handle whatever they uncovered? Or would the truth be something they couldn't live with? One afternoon, as they sat with Detective Johnson, they were presented with a chilling possibility. The investigation into their biological father had uncovered a history of violence and crime far beyond the abduction case. The man who had left them on their grandmother Evelyn's doorstep was not just a fugitive, but a man deeply involved in a network of crime that had affected dozens of lives. The revelation hit Zara like a punch to the gut. They weren't just connected to a crime. They were at the center of it. The twins' lives had been shaped by a legacy they never asked for, and now it was catching up with them. Their grandmother's role in it all became clearer. She had protected them from the man who would have hurt them, but in doing so, she had built a wall of secrets around their lives. The twins couldn't ignore the sacrifices she had made, but at the same time, they couldn't escape the fact that those sacrifices had come at a cost. What did it mean to live a life built on lies? What did it mean to be saved by someone who had kept such dangerous secrets? Zara and Selena didn't have the answers yet, but as they dug deeper into their family's past, the only thing they knew for sure was that the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it was buried. The family's darkest secrets were no longer confined to the past. They were part of the present now, and the twins had to face them head-on. As they sat together, reflecting on the tangled web their family had woven, Zara felt the weight of the journey ahead. But she also felt something else, a sense of resolve. No matter what they uncovered, they had each other, and together they would find a way to piece their fractured world back together. As the investigation continued, the atmosphere in the house had grown colder. Despite their best efforts to find solace in each other, Zara and Selena could feel the weight of their family's dark history bearing down on them. They had spent the past few weeks combing through their grandmother Evelyn's journals, piecing together fragments of a life they had never truly known. What had started as a simple curiosity about their ancestry had morphed into a haunting journey into a past filled with secrets, lies, and unspoken truths. The more they learned, the more questions seemed to rise in the space between them. Every new discovery left them grappling with their own identity, with who they were and what their blood really meant. But beyond the sense of betrayal and fear, there was something deeper that began to take shape. A realization that the past, no matter how dark, was something they could not escape. Zara had always been the more reserved of the two. Her reactions were often more measured, more composed. But even she couldn't ignore the profound impact the truth was having on her. Every day, it felt like the ground beneath her was shifting, as if nothing in her life had been solid or certain. Her identity had been built on a foundation of love and family, but now she wasn't so sure who she could trust. Selena, on the other hand, was beginning to show signs of unraveling. The bravado that once defined her was slipping, replaced by a quiet desperation to make sense of it all. She was the first to voice the fear that had been lurking in the back of Zara's mind. What if our entire lives had been a lie? It was a question that seemed almost too big to answer, yet there was no avoiding it. The truth, as painful as it was, had already begun to reshape their lives. No longer could they simply go about their days with the comfort of knowing who they were. They were now tangled in a web of their own family's history, caught between the love they had always known and the shocking reality that had just surfaced. One afternoon, as they sat together, Zara found herself lost in thought, tracing the lines of the old journal entry where their grandmother had written about the mysterious he. Who was he, really? Was he the man who had left them on their doorstep all those years ago? Or was he something else entirely? Selena broke the silence, her voice low but firm. We need to know more about him, about the truth. We can't just leave it hanging like this. Zara hesitated but nodded in agreement. She had been hoping for some external force to step in and provide them with the answers, but it was clear now that they were on their own. They were the ones who had to face this truth head-on. But even as they resolved to push forward, there was a sense of finality in the air. They could not undo the past, and they couldn't change the choices their grandmother had made. The secrets she had kept, no matter how well-intentioned, had shaped their lives in ways they could never undo. The pain of uncovering the truth didn't come from the facts themselves, but from the realization that they had been part of a story far larger than themselves, one that had been unfolding long before they were born. In the days that followed, the family came together in a way they hadn't before. Despite the painful revelations, there was a renewed sense of connection. They were bound by blood, yes, but more importantly, they were bound by love. It was a love that had survived through decades of hardship, through secrets that had threatened to tear them apart. And now, as Zara and Selena looked at each other across the living room, they realized that no matter what else was true, they still had one another. Their grandmother had made her choices, and Rachel had carried those choices with her through the years. But now, it was their turn to write their own story. The secrets were no longer theirs to keep, and the darkness of the past no longer held the power to define them. Together they would face the future, not as victims of their past, but as women who had been shaped by it. And in that moment, Zara and Selena understood that while they couldn't change the history that had brought them here, they had the power to shape what came next. The following weeks were filled with a sense of quiet determination. Zara and Selena were no longer passive recipients of the truths their grandmother had hidden. They were actively searching for closure. The more they unraveled, the more they realized how deeply their family had been affected by a past that none of them had truly understood. And yet, amid the pain, a sense of responsibility began to take root within them. They had to see this through, not just for themselves, but for the generations that came before them and the ones that would follow. Rachel, despite her initial reluctance to delve deeper, had become their anchor. She was the steady hand guiding them through the confusion. She had her own share of questions, ones she hadn't dared ask for years, but she was determined to ensure that her daughters understood that no matter what came to light, their family was strong enough to endure it. As the investigation continued, they began piecing together the story of the man connected to their biological father. Detective Johnson had his own theories, but nothing was concrete. The trail had gone cold after their biological father's disappearance, but Zara and Selena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by forces they didn't fully understand. The past, though buried, had a way of resurfacing when least expected, and as much as they wanted to close the chapter, they knew there were still unanswered questions. One evening, as Zara sat in her room, she found herself once again staring at the photographs of their family. She thought of their grandmother and the years of silence, the way she had shielded them from a truth that had the potential to tear their world apart. But as much as they wished for things to have been different, they realized they couldn't change the past. What mattered now was how they chose to move forward. The phone rang, jolting Zara out of her thoughts. It was Detective Johnson. "Do you have a moment to talk?" he asked, his voice tinged with urgency. "What is it?" Zara replied, her heart skipping a beat. "There's something you need to see. I believe we've found your father." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Zara looked over at Selina, who was sitting nearby. Without saying a word, Selina stood up and walked over, her face a mixture of anticipation and fear. "What does this mean?" Zara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It means," Johnson began, "that the truth we've been chasing has finally caught up with us. The man your grandmother tried so hard to protect you from has resurfaced, and now it's time for you to make a choice. Whether you face him or walk away, the decision is yours." They hung up the phone, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The weight of the decision ahead hung heavily between them. Could they face the man who had been part of their lives in such an unexpected way, or would they continue on, knowing that some truths were better left in the past? The next morning, Zara and Selina sat in the kitchen with Rachel, the silence hanging thick. It wasn't until Rachel spoke that they found the words to break the stillness. "I'll stand by you," she said quietly, "no matter what." Her words were a balm, a reminder that no matter the outcome, they had each other. The truth, however painful, had to be faced. But they didn't have to face it alone. As they prepared for the next step in their journey, they knew that the answers they were about to uncover would change their lives forever. Yet, in the depth of the unknown, they also realized that it wasn't the answers that defined them. It was how they chose to respond to the truth, how they embraced their past and built their future that would ultimately shape their story. And in that moment, Zara and Selina understood that the greatest strength wasn't found in the certainty of the answers, but in the courage to keep moving forward. The message of their story was simple, yet profound. Family isn't just defined by the blood running through your veins, but by the choices you make, the love you share, and the way you confront the truths that shape your identity. It's about resilience in the face of hardship and the unshakable belief that, no matter the past, the future is still theirs to write. The story of Zara and Selina uncovers the importance of facing uncomfortable truths, and how our past, no matter how hidden or forgotten, can shape our future. In life today, many of us carry family secrets or unspoken histories that, when revealed, can feel overwhelming. However, this story teaches us that it is not the secrets that define us, but how we handle them once they come to light. The courage to confront the unknown and the strength to move forward are qualities we can all apply to our own lives. In dealing with challenging truths, it is important to remember that facing them doesn't mean we are bound by them. It means we have the opportunity to change the narrative. Just like Zara and Selina, who relied on their family's love and support, we can draw strength from those around us to navigate through life's toughest moments. Moreover, this story highlights the power of choice, how we respond to adversity. Whether we run from it or confront it determines our path forward. In our modern world, it's easy to ignore uncomfortable truths, but the key lies in embracing them and learning from them, knowing that our future is still in our hands.